Well, kia ora e te whānau, and welcome to those of you online as well, and to the blokes out here today. Happy Father's Day. Hope today there's a moment when there's a call or a card or maybe some special meal or snack or whatever it might be, maybe even a gift, just to appreciate the dads connecting with us today too. For my kids, they woke up early this morning. They had some chocolate pastries all laid out for breakfast for me, and they even did a couple of cards for me. There's this rumor in the family. My kids think I must have descended from a toad. Kids, eh? And so they drew me a couple of pictures here of toads to say Happy Father's Day. This one, you're totally awesome, Dad. It's like a dad joke, really, isn't it? And in fact, the worship team pointed out today, you're kind of like dressed like a toad as well in green, which isn't all that respectful, is it? But to the blokes today, hope today's a really special day to be able to celebrate the special role that you play. I also know, though, how hard days like this can be. You know, it was 18 years ago this past month when Robin and I lost our firstborn son at birth. His name was Toby Jack, or TJ, as we affectionately remember him. And I remember attending my first Father's Day, which was just like a couple of weeks after his memorial service. And for some reason, I thought, oh, no, it'll be fine. I'll be brave through the service. And I was like a fool. I had no idea. I got through about like a third of the service before I had to leave because I didn't want to like fall apart publicly. It's hard though, isn't it? And the thing is, we all have stories of pain. That pain might be triggered by events like today, Father's Day, for a whole lot of different reasons. Or it might be a whole lot of other things because pain is a universal language. And we're often not sure what to do with our pain, and we're often not sure how to help other people who experience that pain. And that's really what this whole series we've been going through is all about, reflecting on the suffering and the difficulties, what we're calling these thorns in our flesh that come up way too often in our experiences. In fact, just over here in our symbolic wailing wall, you know, right at the beginning of the series, we asked you to list down some of the thorns that you experience, and we won't be going through and reading those, but I would imagine if we did so, we'd find a range of different thorns that people have. Short-term experiences, long-term painful moments, past and present suffering, internal and external angst, thorns of various sizes and shapes. And in many ways, what's on this symbolic wailing wall is really captured in the messiness of our painting here today. It's what suffering's like, isn't it? And yes, we have an artist with us today, Nicola Warner. Can we show our welcome to Nicola today? And so if you kind of get bored or distracted by what I'm saying, you can just concentrate on what Nicola's doing, because she's really graphically portraying what our hopes are and have been during this series, to see what God can do in the midst of the mess. You see, throughout the centuries, there's been a particular story that people have come to in the messiness of life, in the messiness of suffering, been drawn to again and again. It's a story of one of the best men who has ever lived, who suffered more deeply than anyone who has ever lived. It's a story of a man named Job, and it's found amidst the Hebrew scriptures in our Bibles. And the story begins describing Job's happy and blessed life this way. There was once a man named Job who lived in the land of Uz. He was blameless, a man of complete integrity. He feared God. He stayed away from evil. If anyone could ever be described as good, it's this guy, Job. And I want you to tuck that away for a moment, because it's going to come up really important for how we understand what happens from here. Did you notice that his outer life and his inner life are above reproach? There's no spots, there's no wrinkles, there's no hidden areas of moral failure. And all of this has come out of this genuine relationship that he has with his God. We're also told that he was incredibly blessed. Listen to this. He had 7 sons and 3 daughters, so 10 kids. You know, in the ancient world, this was a sign of God's blessing upon you. He had 7,000 sheep. You know, in the ancient world, there's a huge farm. 3,000 camels, that would be like a large fleet. 500 pairs of oxen, 500 donkeys, lots of like farm machinery, many servants. in other words, a large staff of employees. We read that he was the richest person in that entire area. Job had it all going for him, incredibly successful. This was code for saying Job's life was incredibly blessed by God. But one day, this good man's life came crashing down. I don't know if you've ever watched a large building ever being demolished. You know, they place all the dynamite in those strategic locations in the basement. They get the fuse, they light the fuse, and then in one moment, this large building just like crashes into this pile of rubble. It kind of describes what happens next in Job's life. Listen to this. One day when Job's sons and daughters were feasting at the oldest brother's house, a messenger arrived at Job's home with this news. Your oxen were plowing with the donkeys feeding beside them, and the Sabians raided us. They stole all the animals. They killed all the farmhands. I'm the only one who has escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, another messenger arrived with this news. The fire of God has fallen from heaven and burnt up all your sheep and your shepherds. I'm the only one who escaped to tell you. While he was still speaking, a third messenger arrived with this news. 3 bands of Chaldean raiders have stolen your camels. They've killed your servants. I'm the only one who is left to tell you. While he was still speaking, another messenger arrived with this news. Your sons and daughters. Your sons and daughters were feasting in the oldest brother's home, and suddenly a powerful wind swept in from the wilderness. It hit the house on all sides, and the house collapsed, and your children are dead. I'm the only one who escaped to tell you. I mean, violent raids, the fire, the wind, it all just like came together, and within minutes, Job's blessed, happy life has just like crumbled into this pile of rubble. Everything he held as precious, everything that he enjoyed was suddenly destroyed in a matter of minutes. The best possible man has just had the worst possible day. And you know what? It got worse. In the next chapter we read, Satan struck Job with terrible boils from head to foot, and Job scraped his skin with a piece of broken pottery as he sat among the ashes. Job knew what it was to lose 10 children, his business, his home, his career, his health, and he's about to know what it is to lose a reputation and to be rejected even though you've done nothing wrong. And while few people ever suffer perhaps to the degree that Job did, we can't just read this story and not enter into this whole universal painful experience that we all know. The question I want us to sit with today is, how do you help a person in suffering? I mean, how do you really come around a person who's going through grief and pain and loss and whatever they've experienced? What do you do? Because through this series, we've been exploring, the thorns that we all carry and starting to process how we deal with our own grief and loss and the difficulties and pain we feel. But there's another question: how do you help others? Because all of us here, all of us connecting today will have colleagues at work or family members or friends or somebody in our connect group at church or whoever it is. And God has placed us right there and he wants us to help them. So how do we help them? So as we read the rest of Job, the next 30 or so chapters shows us how Job's friends responded. And it's like we're invited to kind of watch and listen and learn from Job's friends about what they do and don't do as we consider what helps and what hurts Job in the midst of his pain. And as we enter into their responses, we're going to see, I guess, the good, the bad, and the ugly of their responses. Effectively, they take on 5 different roles. Only one of those roles is good and healthy and actually helps. The other 4 begin to move from the good into the bad, the ugly, perhaps even the very ugly. So let's look at those 5 different responses. And the first role is the one that we need to embody. It's the role of the friend. The friend who is fully attentive, present, and caring. At the end of chapter 2, Job has his friends drop everything and come to his aid. Amazing story. This is what we read in chapter 2. When three of Job's friends heard of the tragedy that Job had suffered, they got together, they traveled from their homes to comfort and console him. Their names were Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar. When they saw Job from a distance, they scarcely recognized him. The boils, the grief, everything Job's going through. Wailing loudly, they tore their robes, they threw dust into the air over their heads to show their grief. And they sat on the ground with him for 7 days and nights. No one said a word to Job. Nothing. For they saw that his suffering was too great for words. What do you notice? The way these three friends drop everything to come and just be with Job in the pain, just feeling it, allowing themselves to feel it. And they sit there for 7 days and 7 nights. And I want you to notice again that last sentence, no one said a word to Job, for they saw that his suffering was too great for words. This is what friendship looks like. This is the friendship we all need in moments of pain. I mentioned earlier about losing my firstborn son and that Father's Day service that I ran out of because it was just too painful. I went for a walk around the neighborhood of this particular church, and a friend of mine from the church eventually noticed that I had left, and he caught up with me, and I always just appreciate the way he was just there, present, just walking with me, asking some questions, trying to understand what I was going through. That's what a friend does. I remember too that first Saturday after TJ died, and I remember this the way our Connect group at the time just wanted to, they called ahead and said, can we just come around just to sit with you? And they came to the door, and there's a lot of awkwardness as they didn't really know what to do, but they were there. And there was something around just that presence that provided a profound comfort that's hard to describe. The Apostle Paul describes an experience like that himself. We heard about his thorn 3 weeks ago. And not far from talking about his thorn, Paul talks about a particular friend that God brought into his life to help him deal with a very dark moment in his life. He says this, but God, who comforts the downcast, comforted us by the coming of Titus. It's almost like one of those fleeting moments, those fleeting comments that you can read between, the really deep stuff. But this is what we learn is God loves to comfort, and the way God comforts is through people physically gathering with other people. That's what friends do. Friends help us deal with the mess that we're experiencing and to begin to see God as present among us. Some cultures do this better than other cultures, don't they? If you're from a Māori or Pacifica culture, you instinctively just seem to know how to come around people in pain. You reminisce the stories, you go through photos, you turn up, you're just able to sit there in silence for long periods of time. As a Pākehā, and some of you might be able to relate to this, there's just often an awkwardness. We don't know what to do. And if you're like me, I reached out to some other people who have gone through suffering, the good and the bad moments of people when they're rallied around. So I said to them, how does somebody like me who always feels awkward actually help you in the midst of suffering? This is some of the things they said. In the loss of somebody, rather than send flowers, why don't you turn up with flowers? Just to be physically present there, even if it's just for a small amount of time. Another said, perhaps better than taking flowers is to bring some fruit, because there might already be like 20 bunches of flowers on the dining table anyway. Another one said, please don't make it about yourself. I realize when you're there, you probably will feel awkward. You'll probably feel like, I don't know what to do, but remember, it's not actually about how you feel. It's about them. And the last thing you want your friend to feel is that they need to come around your awkwardness and what you're feeling to try to cheer you up, because it's actually not about you, it's about them. Another said, continue to invite people to the event that you're planning. I don't assume they don't want to make it, just don't make decisions for them. And the bit of advice that came through every single conversation was, listen deeply. As one said, convey that we are fearlessly present with them. See, when Eliphaz, Bildad, and Zophar took on the role of friends and they simply sat with Job without saying a word, it's then that God used them to provide comfort to Job. But 7 days went by and then they began to speak. And then we have like the next 30 chapters of speeches that these friends decide to give to Job. And these speeches begin with some degree of sensitivity, and then they devolve into these cutting blows, and we move from the good to the bad and the ugly. And remember that I want us to see that these friends have the right intent, just like you and I have when we turn up and try to help a friend too. But what they said actually added further hurt to the person who's already going through so much angst in his life. In fact, in the middle of these speeches, Job will cry out to his friends, listen to this, "What miserable comforters you are." That's the last thing we want our friends to say to us as they're going through all of this grief. So the question is, how do they go from helping to hurting? Well, instead of simply staying in that lane of being friend, they start to step into 4 other roles. 4 other roles that we should never step into. The first of those roles I want us to talk about for a moment, the philosopher. The philosopher who gives their answer to the why question. So during the 7 days, these friends have sat with Job. They've watched him lament. During these 7 days, I guess they've begun to wonder, I wonder why Job is going through all of this. Remember, Job's life has been incredibly blessed. But within minutes, he's lost his kids, his business, his home, all back to back. And then his health plummeted straight after that. Something must be up. There must be a reason behind all this. And it's natural for us to ask the why question. And if you're in the midst of suffering and you ask the why question, that's okay. Even Jesus, when he's in excruciating pain on the cross, cries out, my God, why have you forsaken me?" It's okay to ask the why question. The problem always seems to come, from my experience, when we try to answer the why question. You see, anyone who's spent time with a suffering friend knows it's like this basic instinct that we all have to want to investigate what went wrong, to pontificate over the reasons, to try to fix the event, to try to fix our friend, to go back to the way things used to be. But you see, when we take on that role of philosopher who gives the answer to the why question, it always seems to go wrong, badly wrong. And we see this in Job's story where everyone gets the answers wrong. They think they're right, but they are so out of line. In fact, the truth behind Job's suffering is something Job never comes to understand, the answer to the why question. His friends will never hear the answer to the why question, but we as readers and hearers of the story are given what's really going on. Apparently there's this conversation God and Satan are having behind the scenes. We read this. One day the members of the heavenly court came to present themselves before the Lord, and the accuser Satan came to be with them. Now, I know that's going to raise a whole bunch of questions which I am not going to answer today. I don't think even the story answers these, so just kind of stay with me. The Lord asked Satan, "Have you noticed my servant Job? He's like the finest man in all the earth. He's blameless, a man of complete integrity. He fears God, stays away from evil." I love the pride God takes in his boy Job. Satan replied to the Lord, "Yeah, but Job has like good reason to fear God. You always place his wall of protection around him and his home and his property. You made him like prosper in everything he does. Look how rich he is. But reach out and take away everything he has, and he will surely curse you to your face." Well, all right, you may test him, the Lord said to Satan. Do whatever you want with him and everything he possesses, but just don't harm him physically. Now, again, this will raise all sorts of questions. And the purpose of the story isn't to answer all those questions, but effectively, I think the author wants us to know there is a reason. But you see, we don't always like the reason. In this case, Satan accuses Job of only serving God because of what Job gets. You can hear him hissing, take it all away. And, Job's only interested in the benefits. You're a means to an end, God. He doesn't love you. He really loves himself. He just wants you to better him. Take it away and, Job's going to drop you God like a hot iron. So God allows Satan to test Job. Because God has such confidence in his boy Job that Job isn't going to desert him, that Job's actually in it in this genuine relationship. But here's the thing. Here's the thing about love relationships. Perhaps you've entered into a relationship with somebody, and if you're really honest, at first you were attracted to that person because of the assets that he or she has. It might be their good looks or their connections or whatever it is. And so you enter in, but over time as you get to know the person, actually it's a mature love. It's what we would call a genuine love, and you love them regardless of those assets. And so as those assets might be taken away, such as like in the aging process or whatever that might be, you love them for the relationship. You love them for who they are. But you see, in our relationship with God, the only way to test that is when those things are taken away. Will we see God as just a genie who comes to our aid when we call on him, but we don't want to be there when we're in pain? Or do we love God for who he is? You see, that's really what the dialogue here is that's going on behind the scenes. But you see, even knowing that doesn't help, does it? And that's often the way it is in our own stories. Even if we knew the reason behind our pain, it doesn't normally help us as we process what's going on. And I wonder how much grief and additional pain has been caused by people who try to answer the why question, often wrongly. And so we give these like soundbite answers or these bumper sticker answers to people in pain. Things like, well, it's all for the best. It's part of God's plan. Comments that might even be true. God never sends people more adversity that they can handle. We know God causes all things to work together for good. All true, but often unhelpful. Perhaps it's just more honest and helpful to say to somebody, I'm so sorry that you're experiencing this right now. I'm so sorry that you're having to go through this. I'm so sorry for your loss. People don't need to hear us pontificate over the why reasons. They actually don't even need to hear that there's a reason. Typically, all that does is bring additional hurt and confusion to somebody needing help. See, when we take on the role of philosopher, we're likely not only to get it wrong, but also likely to bring more hurt. If only Job's friends had stayed in their lane as friend, rather than start to step into these other roles like philosopher. There's another role they step into wrongly. It's the role of the judge who blames the sufferer. When Job's first friend Eliphaz opens his mouth, he begins with what kind of seems polite. Job, will you be patient? Just let me say a word or two. Kind of seems okay. And then he kind of subtly insinuates that something's going on in Job's life. Listen to this. Just stop and think. Do the innocent die? When have the upright been destroyed? My experience shows that those who plant trouble and cultivate evil will harvest the same. I imagine there's like this long pause after that as they kind of want Job to think about this. But you hear the insinuation coming through, don't you? Job, if you must have planted trouble in your past, and now that trouble is coming back to haunt you. Now, that's bad enough, but his friends begin to create, come up with these like random charges. They kind of invent charges of what Job must have done. They say things like this. Job, you must have refused water for the thirsty and food for the hungry. You must have sent widows away empty-handed and crushed the hope of orphans. But we know from the beginning of the story, Job is like blameless. He hasn't done anything like this. His friends are just trying to understand it, come up with these reasons, and therefore judging Job for, well, you must have done something bad. Well, if Eliphaz was more subtle, another friend, Bildad, roars in like a theological bull. Listen to what he says. Does the Almighty twist what's right? Your children must have sinned against him, so their punishment was well deserved. Which you can paraphrase as this. Job, let's cut to the chase. God killed your 10 kids because he was sick to death of their sin. Ouch. And then he continues. But if you seek the favor of the Almighty and if you're pure and live with integrity, he will surely rise you up and restore your happy home. In other words, if you just like repent and pray, everything's going to be right again in your life. It's unbelievable. Now, most of us, I doubt, are going to like roar in like a theological bull with guns blazing, but I do wonder if we can even just insinuate at times that something must be wrong. Remember, his friends are saying all of this with the right intent. They want Job to be back to where he used to be, so they're assuming that Job's done something wrong, and it comes out of a faulty theology. So it's a faulty theology that says, if you're good, God will give you a good life. If you're bad, God will cause you to suffer in life. At first, Job must have been doing something good because God had blessed him in so many ways, but now he must have done something bad because God must be now punishing him pretty badly. And we need to really grasp this because we need to realize not all of my problems are caused by my own sins or wrongdoing. Now, it is true that my personal sin and my personal, the things I do wrongly can cause problems and suffering in my life. Yes, I realize that I am sinful and needy to my core, and yet Job also teaches us there is such a thing as innocent suffering. As readers, we can see that in the story. Job's suffering, it's not punitive, it's not corrective, it's not even the discipline of God upon his life. It's actually God backing his boy Job. So let me say this though. If you're going through pain right now and some suffering and difficulty, and perhaps you've had friends come around you and they've kind of insinuated that it must be because you've done something wrong. If that's you, I'm so sorry that you're going through that. And if that's your experience, I want you to remember, actually, Jesus went through something very similar. In fact, in his case, the religious leaders rallied around him and said, well, you must be demon-possessed. The crowd looked upon Jesus and accused him of being cursed by God for something that he had done himself. You see, we have a God who knows what it is to be judged unfairly. Again, if only Job's friends had stayed in their lane as friends, but instead they took on the role of philosopher, they took on the role of judge. There's another role we often take on. I call it the competitor who compares your pain with theirs. Now, this role doesn't come up in the story of Job, but it does come up in Roland Foreman's book. Our congregation member sitting just over here who wrote the book, The Point of Your Thorns. Roland, in that book, identifies this as a common thing we often do in the midst of pain. It's like a game, he says, that we play. He calls it, my pain is greater than your pain. And the rules go something like this. Tell someone about your thorn or thorns, then listen while they regale you with how much greater and more painful their thorns or catalogue of thorns are, and then pull out another pain card. Does any of that sound familiar? You see, if you're in the midst of kind of receiving that, when you share your pain and there's somebody else tries to trump you in the midst of what they've experienced, you kind of go away from the conversation going, I already felt lonely before, now I feel like nobody gets me. Nobody understands what I'm experiencing, what I'm going through, and you feel just incredibly lonely, which is one of the things that pain often does to us. You see, the truth is that two people can go through the identical set of circumstances, and yet feel it and process it very differently. In fact, a friend of mine puts it this way. He says the most important thing we need to know about a person is that we don't know the most important thing about a person. In other words, we don't know everything going on behind the scenes. We don't know the trigger points maybe from their past or the other pressure points going through or what's going on in their mind or their emotions right now. We're all different people. And so we can go through the same thing and yet we might be able to deal with it pretty well, and somebody else, they just crumble through what they're going through. You see, when we go through something, we are able to comfort people. It's called empathy. But it doesn't mean that we need to share all of our experience with other people. Really, we just need to sit there and be present and to be a friend. That's what people need in these moments. There's one final role that the friends take on. This one's especially true in Christian communities. I call this final role, the fifth role, the divine defender who comes to the rescue of God's reputation. You see, Job knew that he was innocent, but he had pretty similar theology to what his friends had. If you're good, God's going to give you a good life. If you're bad, God's going to cause you to suffer. But of course, Job knows that he's done nothing wrong to deserve what he's going through. So he comes to the conclusion, actually, since I'm suffering and I'm good, God must be the one who's acting unfairly and unjustly. And so Job calls God to account. He demands that God shows up as like a subpoena to God. Come into this public courtroom, God, and defend yourself. And it's almost like he's saying, God, I know better than you how to run the universe. Now, Job's friends hear all of this, and so you can understand it. They instinctively jump to be divine defenders. They understandably take offense at what they're hearing from Job's mouth. And it's natural for them to take offense. We love God. We want to defend God's reputation. But this is often what people go through when they're in pain and difficulty. What we need to appreciate is natural and normal for people amidst grief and pain to get angry and to say things that might not even be true. I want you to see how God responds to what Job says. See, while Job's friends have taken on these four hurtful roles, the whole time God has been taking on that role of friend. God is fully attentive. He's just sitting there listening to the conversation. And when God finally does speak, he gives Job this greater revelation about himself that moves Job to just awe at who God is. God asks a bunch of questions. Job, do you know where light comes from? Do you know where darkness goes? Do you know how to get there? Surely you know, Job. Job, who sends rain to satisfy the parched ground? Job, where does beauty come from? How are the flowers really made? Why are they so beautiful, Job? Question after question after question to help Job come to appreciate the awe and the presence and the majesty of God. And Job and his friends have been looking at the initial mess and trying to figure it all out. And God steps in and he starts to reveal his beauty and his presence even amidst the pain. And Job's just in awe. And Job never comes to understand the reasons behind his suffering. The mess is still in the background, but amidst the mess, Job comes to know who God is in this profound way, in a beautiful way. And Job comes to love and trust God simply because God is God, not for anything he might get from God. And he comes to see how amazing God is. But what about Job's friends? Well, his friends, I guess, kind of expect God to step in and punish Job even more. And kind of instead, God vindicates Job and he puts his friends in their place. We read this. After the Lord had finished speaking to Job, he said to Eliphaz, I'm angry with you and your two friends, for you have not spoken accurately about me as my servant Job has. Now, as I kind of sit with that, I'm like, it's kind of a strange thing for God to say. Because Job has made some pretty out there comments about God. Job's like cursed the day he was born. He's been challenging God's wisdom. He's crying out. He's complaining bitterly, expressing like these deep doubts. He doesn't seem to convey a strong faith at all. But God stands with his boy Job. You see, God is big enough to handle all the complaints. God doesn't actually need you or me to defend him to anyone who's going through pain and raising all sorts of questions and maybe making all sorts of insinuations, saying things wrong. You see, yes, Job's prayers were heated, but he was talking to God. Yes, he complained, but he's complaining to God. Yes, he doubted, but he's bringing those doubts to God. And the whole time, Job is looking to God, that God is the only one he believes that can be present in the mess. He's trying to make sense of it, but he's looking to God in the midst of it all. See, God doesn't need any of us to be divine defenders. He simply wants us to be friends of the person who's suffering. So how do we help and not hurt somebody going through pain? Because my guess is that all of us have a colleague, a neighbor, a family member, somebody in our connect group, whoever it might be. There's somebody, maybe the Spirit of God's even bringing that person to mind right now. And I believe if that's true, God has placed you right where you are in their lives because He wants you to be a friend to those people. He actually wants to comfort that person, and He wants to use you as His ambassador, as His representative to bring the comfort of God to that person. And He's inviting you to step in and be that friend. So what does a friend do? Proverbs, we read this. A friend loves at all times. A brother is born in time, or a brother is born for, say it, adversity. A real friend sticks closer than a brother. So if you're unsure what to do, my advice is simply to ask, what does a good friend do right now? How might I be the best friend they need as they experience this pain? You know, as we begin to finish, I reckon it's appropriate to give Job the chance to say what he would do and what he would say if he could swap places with his friends. This is what he says. I could say the same things if you were in my place. I could spout off criticism. I could shake my head at you. But if it were me, I would encourage you. I would try to take away your grief. In other words, Job says, I could take on the role of the philosopher who gives their answer to the why question. And I could take on the role of the judge who blames the sufferer. No, I could take on the role of the competitor who compares your pain with theirs. I could take on the role of divine defender who comes to the rescue of God's reputation. But Job says, no, I would take on the role of the friend. The friend who is fully attentive and present and caring. And that's the friend we all need to be when we're suffering. That's the friend we need when we're suffering. That's who we need to be for each other. Our painting over here began as a mess. And yet stroke by stroke, we start to see God's presence and God's beauty even amidst the mess. And I wonder if God wants to use friendship just as a way where our presence brings strokes into somebody's life. And in the midst of the mess and everything going on, it's like somebody starts to see God is here. I don't really understand it all, but I'm beginning to see God is present amidst what's going on. And He does so through the presence you bring. And just through that, there's like stroke by stroke by stroke, something different starts to emerge. I mean, imagine what would happen in our city if we all step in as friends to people hurting around us right now. Imagine the renewal as God seeks to renew people in places everywhere of what might happen as we just step in as friends. That's really radical. It's actually really deep. But it just means we need to step out and be friends to people. Each week during our series, we've been giving out different cards that have been designed for the series. There's one final card. They've all had different purposes as we've kind of reflected on our own thorns and pain. This one's to actually pass to other people. In a moment, we're going to invite you to come up and take communion. The cards are up at the communion tables, and I want you to pick up 1, 2, or however many of these cards you want. And in a moment, I'm going to lead us in prayer. And I just want you to ask, God, who might you be wanting me to encourage right now? Who might you be wanting me to help, to just be that friend? And then maybe just take this card. Might be this afternoon, might be tomorrow morning. We just grab a pen and you just give somebody some encouragement to remind them that you're there, you're just praying for them. And then you might send it to them, or better still, give them a call and say, hey, can we catch up for a coffee? Give them the card and ask them how they're doing. Because it might be that just that small gesture, it's almost like a stroke in the midst of their mess, as there's this beauty, this reminder, God is present. God is here. God is doing something. What if we can stand together? And just together, if you feel comfortable, you might even just want to put your hands out as a gesture to say, God, I want you to use me. And just to ask, God, who are the people right now that actually just need me to be a friend? They don't really need you to say a whole lot. They just want you to be present. And we believe God has placed you right where you are, so just make yourself available to say, here I am, God. Would you send me? Would you use me? Just have a quiet conversation with God around who that is. Oh, Father, thank you that when we talk to you, we're talking to one who understands pain. Jesus, thank you that as we talk to you, we're talking to one who experienced something very similar to Job. That you left your home, you knew what it was to lose friends, you knew what it was for people to turn on you and cast all sorts of insinuations upon you. Jesus, we know that you voluntarily went to the cross. And you know what it is to experience those thorns, even taking a crown of thorns, or having a crown of thorns crushed over your head. So Jesus, thank you that when we talk to you, we're talking to one who understands pain. And one who in the midst of mess is able to bring something beautiful and glorious from it. And so we ask that you would help us embody that hope, to be full of hope, even amidst all the unknowns and the questioning and difficulties and mess that comes through in this topic. And we pray that you would help us to step in as your instruments of hope in this world. I thank you that everywhere you're turning mess into beauty, and you will do in the future. And we ask that you would help us to just be friends of those people that you've brought to mind. And that perhaps through a card, or perhaps just through turning up and to be present, that you would bring reminders that you're here, reminders that you're good, reminders that you've got this. And so Jesus, as we take this bread and this cup, reminders to us of suffering, but reminders also of victory and hope. We take these elements, and together we join with what you're doing to renew people and places in this world. Thank you, Jesus. Thank you, Jesus. Amen.